Welcome to Journey Through the Eyes, the EMDR podcast that is here to unveil and explore the transformative power of EMDR therapy. We are here because our mission is to support both new and seasoned clinicians with those critical conversations, the resources about EMDR therapy, and powerful resources to support you in building your amazing private practice. I am one of your hosts. I am Tamera J. Brown. I am the CEO and founder of Arise Psychotherapy and Coaching Services here in the beautiful state of Texas. And I have with me my amazing co-host, Miss Kathy on the couch.
I am Kathy Couch. Tamera is also getting her PhD in divination, so don't let her forget that. She never says that. And so I think it's super important for our listeners, specifically for this podcast. So I just want to validate you and know that I see you. So I am Kathy Couch here, and I'm Twin Falls, Idaho, and I have Rewired 360 and Willow Creek Counseling. I also have a hair going out of place, which is okay. Today, we have our beautiful consultant, EMDR consultant, Noel Andrus out of Denham Springs, Louisiana. And it's fabulous. We're here to talk about religious trauma. And she has Cornerstone Counseling, also offers several retreats across the country. And so we're so grateful to be here today.
So excited.
Absolutely love being here with you guys and having this conversation. I think it's a needed conversation that people don't talk about too often.
Yes. So Tamera and Noel were both in our EMDR consulting and certification programs, EMDR University, and we all had a chance to meet. I knew it'd be a match made in heaven when I introduced the two. So this is all of our spirit people. So today we're just going to start, Noel, let's just kind of talk about, you and I kind of connected over our passion for religious trauma. I can share some of mine, but let's first sort of hear a little bit about your passion and experience and where that's at. I also have sirens going off outside, so I'm just going to mute.
All right. So I'm Noelle, and I am a licensed clinical social worker and supervisor, EMDR consultant. And like Kathy said, we also host women's wellness retreats throughout the year. And that's a beautiful passion. It is absolutely phenomenal to do and to witness that growth and that strength within these women that come to these retreats. But and working with religious trauma, and that's something that kind of found me, I think, in a lot of areas that we get into in therapy and in the people helping profession, is that I started noticing this trend and this pattern and these these themes that were coming up with many people. And I find that in a lot of areas of my work, is that through different seasons of my work with people, that there are themes that come through. And it was like, I really need to understand this better, because there's a lot of ethical considerations in it. And we don't want to project our own values or beliefs. We don't want to do these things. And we also really need to tread lightly. And because it's someone's spiritual beliefs or religion or something, especially if they grew up in it in generations, or very rigid religiosity, that can be very destabilizing. And so started doing these crash course trainings and books and readings and learning about it and better understanding where is a good foundational start for those who are recognizing their own religious trauma. And it became something that once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you hear it, you can't unhear it.
Yeah, right.
But pacing it is very, very important with clients. Because just like anything else, it has to be an awareness that they have. And for us to just tell them, hey, I think you have religious trauma, that most of the time that doesn't turn out quite well.
Yeah, I think what's important for our listeners is, I'm going to show this. If you're watching it on YouTube, you can see it. It was actually coined by Marlene Winell, the leader of this book, Leaving the Fold, in 2011. And so what happened is, sort of in my journey, first of all, thank you, Noel. I think that's beautiful. I think all those things are relevant. I think if we can look at the religious trauma as also like cultural, that could be a way maybe to approach it as well. What happened to me is I was leaving my private practice when there's a certain denomination where I live in Idaho, people and patients had been coming to me saying, I'm experiencing this, I'm leaving my dogmatic, controlling religious doctrine, and I have this group of belief systems that are impacting me. And as an EMDR therapist, I was thinking, wow, what do I do with this? And so then I found the book, Leaving the Fold, and then there's a curriculum online that you can use for groups. And so I held my first and only group for religious trauma, but it's very impactful work. And I think as we look at this work that we're doing with religious trauma, I think it gets to the core of the spirit, the soul. And I think you do have to tread very lightly. I do think that it's one of the most severe forms of trauma because it's the soul, the spirit, the very essence of who we are. And so that
Worthiness. Yeah.
right, that was one of what drove my passion and finding this curriculum. And then there's a religious trauma institute in Idaho. And so I think that just kind of developed into this thing that we're doing. So I think as we're looking at these other religious doctrines, to know there's a place.
I think that that is incredible. Okay. And so I was so excited about us coming in and having this conversation because for me, I I was involved in a deeply religious church for a number of years, and I've always been a very curious girl, and there were just things that didn't line up, and then when I would ask questions, I was labeled as all sorts of things and rejected and was experiencing all these things. And um, I found along my journey that I grew so tired of being labeled and couldn't tell if I was being accepted, if I was a part, did I belong, did I not, did I have quote unquote demons, as they were saying, and then how do I get them out? Because, this behavior, this curiosity, and this questioning I have isn't appropriate. Where's it coming from? And going through that for a number of years and having this epic experience of of the leaders in the church taking an idea that I shared with them and turning it into their business plan without talking to me, and having a whole church meeting and letting the church know this is what we're going to do and all these things. And I had just came out of a divorce. I was going through a lot, and here they were presenting this idea that was mine as a business plan for their church. And I got up and I walked out and I never went back. It did impact. And I thank you, Kathy, for validating something that I was like, why did it take me so long? Because now I understand it is one of the most severe traumas, and why it involving the spirit, the mind, and the soul. And I want to ask you, Noel, just so that we have clarity, and for the people who come across this beautiful podcast today, how do you define religious trauma, just so that we have, just some clarity and folks can easily understand, even though it's, really complex, right?
That conversation could take days, but religious trauma it's so vast and it's very specific to the person. And so whereas, when you're talking, what it brought up for me was, what is trauma? It's betrayal, being betrayed by those that you trust or those charged with protecting you or guiding you. And whenever we are betrayed by people, like, that is a trauma. It shakes you to your core. And for a lot of people, spirituality, religion, which I separate to be two different things, is their identity. It's a part of their identity for a lot of people. And not going to overgeneralize and say for all people, but for a lot of people, it's part of their identity. And so with religious trauma, that is something that affects it could be public humiliation in the church. It could be the use of religious doctrine to control. or to say, you know, you're supposed to behave this way, don't dress that way, don't act this way. And it can be something that is complex and over and over and over again. And these are just a few examples, and it shows up very specific and per the person of how they experience it and how they internalize it. And typically what happens and where we want to start in treating it is the impact on their self-worth that it creates. If I am not worthy, say it's parents who use religion, right, as a means of controlling or punishment. If I cannot be worthy in the eyes of my mother or father, or in the eyes of my pastor, right, then how could I ever be worthy in the eyes of God? And it creates these belief patterns, these core beliefs within us of attacking our self-worth and our essence of who we are as a person.
That is loaded. I
Yeah,
mean,
I know that is
you know what
loaded.
I mean? It's loaded and it's powerful, and you really kind of led me to where I am. And y'all better say something, because this juicy, and I'm like, woo. But I, you know, when you talk about, because religious trauma is its own branch, right, of trauma, things that we as EMDR therapists and other therapists are helping support, guiding other human beings on. What would you say, Noel, that you see is a big difference between someone who has, like you said, like parent or childhood trauma and religious trauma?
Again, with all trauma, it's specific to the person, but a difference between, let's say, religious trauma and childhood trauma, that's a really good question, right? Like that would be something that is how it impacts the future of that person, right? So whereas someone who has religious trauma will have a really hard time making decisions, their sense of self, which other traumas, other big T traumas and little T traumas have that impact as well. But with specifically with religious trauma, you're used to being told what to do, who you are.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to identify, which is another one of those ethical considerations in treating it, is that they're going to ask you, what should I do? What should I leave my church, right? Should I find a new religion? Should I do this? Should I do that? And that's not our job, is to tell them like, yeah, I think you should leave your church, right? It's that self-determination and allowing them to awaken that themselves. The impact in, let's say, someone who specifically more raised in religious communities that are not so much rigid, but more from a cult sector, right? And coming in, they're likely to then, even if they leave that cult, they're likely to find themselves in other religious sectors or other churches who are also just as controlling, or relationships that are just as controlling, if not dysfunctional, and because it's familiar. And those patterns continuing to repeat because that is the wiring of the brain. So that has to be rewired. And again, that's when you say that out loud, it's very similar to other traumas. It's just the symptoms that come with the specific trauma of religion.
I think also too here, what I just kind of wanted to talk about just for a few seconds is, I think if you can look, I think an important question when you're making your assessment is the developmental nature of the indoctrination. If you entered into the religion or experience as an adult, it's going to be very different than if you entered in as a child and you were socialized for these beliefs. So my response would be, maybe if you were entered in as a child, we need to look at those beliefs to see how traumatic they were to that child part as your right now self, or your adult part experiencing this world that you live in. I shouldn't have sex. I shouldn't drink. I shouldn't watch TV. I shouldn't wear a dress. I shouldn't wear jewelry. And wherever they are in that rainbow of experience, maybe they're still there, but maybe they're not. The whole core idea where we start is the membership component. And so when we're treating it and they became a member, whether it was their choice or not, what how do you find that those ways of becoming a member in communities that you want now, whether they're still in there or not, that it tells me they're still wired for socialization and those experiences. So encouraging them, how do you find those connections? Have you had connections in your past? Those sorts of things that really fill you up. We were talking about art earlier. Is it the art community? Can you find different ways there? And I think just in my experience, the traumas have been from people that are post religious entity and institution. I haven't treated someone currently in that. Well, actually, I have. And so I think those are two different experiences as well. If they're currently a member and struggling with the concerns, or if they're very sure like these don't align with my values, you can treat those from very different perspectives.
And some people come into therapy with a completely different goal and through their own processing, and especially with EMDR, and because what is meant to come up will come up, it's going to clump those together, and they'll come to that realization that this has happened in that environment. And kind of going back to your question, Tamera, and as Kathy was talking, when we're working with a lot of attachment wounds too, when you're born into those communities, or you're born into those types of religious communities. And you're not only working with the attachment wounds, you're not only working with the sense of self and the wounding of who am I, right? But when we look at therapy, when you're from a holistic approach, you're working with mind, body, spirit. And spirituality is something that is so very important in our feeling of wholeness. And how can we feel whole and complete if that is damaged?
I think
Whereas
that
people
is
who have
incredible.
I'm sorry, we're working with complex trauma, their spirituality, their faith may be one of their biggest coping skills, and that's already intact. That's there.
That brings to my mind, right? Just as you're talking and sharing, and we're moving into looking at EMDR and how we facilitate that in helping our clients to heal and grow and overcome, things like religious trauma. What would you say you've witnessed as maybe a client that you worked with, in one of the ways the religious trauma is impacting them, like, just in everyday life? What do you notice are some of the challenges that they are struggling with that impacts, just that overall sense of wholeness and wellness and all that?
Everything.
Wow.
Just about everything. They're, we had mentioned their ability to make choices and decisions for themselves, trusting themselves, trusting the world around them, knowing who to trust is a big one. Not knowing who to trust. I said earlier, like there's that pattern sometimes of engaging in similar communities, maybe not in the same way, but then those wounds being reopened because these betrayals are happening again. Relationships, right? Challenging, creating a barrier, formulating secure and authentic relationships, maybe keeping people at arm's length away. The confusion of I genuinely care, but I can't get too close is something that I've seen a lot with individuals. And within not only with the world around them, but if they do still have contact with their families of origin, there's a lot of complicated dynamics there too.
I think also too, just in my experience with patients, there was an experience where the leader of the church was asking her, telling her, making her feel dirty as a 12-year-old for maturing, and that those issues with her body, and just degrading sex, like, you do want that boy, don't you? And she's like, I don't even know what you're talking about. And so that stuck with her to where she's like, as a 12-year-old, I shouldn't be having this conversation in a room with a male alone. and the betrayal from her mother, to where her mom didn't protect her. Her mother knew that this conversation would be occurring, and her family, they've talked about it, but then the role in my, you know, world, is that the role of the parent, or is that the role of the church? And who should be having those conversations about your body and sexuality and sexual development at that 12-year-old state? So who takes those responsibilities, for those scenarios? I think that can be really impactful. That
Mhm.
Boundaries, right? Like, what is trauma? Lack of boundaries. There's no boundaries there.
Mhm.
Frail boundaries.
And they're
yeah.
trusting, right? They're trusting these leaders. This is what we do. This is our process. I think to just challenge those institutional systems sometimes doesn't feel good. You'll be ostracized. You won't be able to enter the sacred church, or maybe the congregation will know because you're not there. I don't know how to put it. You're working on repairing the things that you have with God in a public place. I had another scenario where this is a little graphic, but in a domestic violence scenario, a male lit the female's house on fire, and she was with another partner, and he lit their house on fire when they were in it, and he was praised in the church. And so that trauma of, not protecting her from those scenarios and not validating that she deserved really even to live was traumatic. So when she went back to church, it was her fault, not for being in this other relationship, not his fault for setting the house on fire.
And
Isn't
some
it?
of those core beliefs also being, my needs don't matter, my emotions don't matter. Talking about religious trauma is really hard for people because it feels like you're doing something wrong.
Right.
It feels like you're betraying God, or you're betraying that system. And as trauma often does, it makes us feel like the bad guy. We're doing.
And it just really sounds like deep blame, right? Because one of the things that I notice, and I don't know if you all have, because I know all different cultures do religion differently. And one of the things that I've noticed, especially in the African American community with the clients that I have served with this, um, when life isn't going well, it is automatically the devil. It is automatically, any challenge they're facing, anything that makes them uncomfortable, from negative dreams or, just discomforting dreams, nightmares, all the things, everything is blamed towards this demonic presence that is attacking me. And in one of the clients that I noticed with her is her hyperarousal state. It's like she was going to work looking for demons and devils. Her kids at home, demons and devils. And the question I have, with this, is there a real impact, right, on the nervous system when someone views the world as not safe because the devil is like everywhere and behind everything and you better watch it, type of deal?
I'd imagine so. Yeah. When you have to look over your shoulder all the time and fearful. And when we think about, heaven and hell and devils and demons, it's black and white, it's good and bad. And if I have the devil within me, then I am bad. Then I am bad. Then I have to, there's something wrong with me if there's demons and the devil's in me, the devil's attacking me.
Everywhere. In the bathroom.
Everywhere.
At the grocery store, somebody looked, and it just was, and I so appreciate this conversation and the work we're able to do, right, through EMDR. What would you say, Noel, in your experience, when you integrate and you use EMDR to support the clients you're serving who have been struggling and suffering with this? How does EMDR therapy, how has it helped, maybe if, in comparison with the talk therapies or like CBT therapy, and trying to help a client to move through something like this?
I think with EMDR, we get away from the narrative
Okay.
of the story of what happened,
Mhm.
and allowing them, because I think this is for any target, but within EMDR, but to somatically process it through the body and to be able to reconnect with their body. As Kathy had mentioned, it has a big impact on your relationship to your body, has a
Mhm.
big impact on your feelings and emotions, your needs being okay. And so as we're going through and we're choosing targets such as I am unworthy, or I am bad, or I am unlovable, I am unworthy in the eyes of God, right? If you want to get really specific with it, and you're able to move through that without being so hyper fixated on the narrative of specifically the story of what happened, but because trauma is the aftermath of the impact of what pathways it created internally for you in your own beliefs about yourself and what's going on within your body. And
Yeah,
so it's a gentle way of being able to untangle something that's so very delicate.
Yeah, I think also too, like if you look at a single episode trauma, right? You have an experience that's stored in your body or your nervous system, you come to EMDR therapy, we can work on that. With the religious trauma, it's so much more pervasive because there's so many different moments to where it's a cultural or a identity or a lived experience over time with so many different targets. And so if you look at the adaptive information processing model, what happens with EMDR versus other therapies is you have the brain, you have the memory. So we can get to those specific memories, the networks, the nodes, as Francine Shapiro calls it, to be able to reprocess the thoughts, the emotions, the body sensations. So I think that there's a natural, even more pervasive connection with the nervous system because of these several clusters of experiences. And so encouraging patients to create their own new disconfirming experiences, to where I wrote about it on my blog, where it's like you hold this other experience that you had to where you felt validated, you felt heard, you felt safe, trusted, and you're holding that as your own sacred reality for yourself, because that's really what the core is. There's beginning to find some questioning in self in the world. I have these beliefs, I go to first grade, everyone doesn't do this. And so creating this validation as a therapist on the memories and processing that, but also in resourcing in phase 2, where we can create these alternate experiences or caregivers, right? You're shaking your head, and we can install those or strengthen those as resources to reduce that arousal of that nervous system. So the vagus nerve can be clear.
Right, right. That was such a beautiful and thorough explanation. Yeah, and that's exactly what we're doing there. And giving that, the words that come up for me is that present day reparative experience,
Well, that's
finding
good.
present day repair and offering the opportunity. And that's what I love about future template too. And doing the present day triggers and future template, we're giving present day repair and establishing new relationships with faith and spirituality, right? Establishing new relationships on their terms and in their own pace, and once you get to that point to where they're ready, and you can't do that first, but we do have to get some nurturing figures in there.
Yeah.
We do have to get some rewiring going on in there through in phase 2. But especially with religious trauma, please don't skip phases. Please.
Right.
Yeah, and you're gonna spend a lot of time in phase 2 for some people. You're
Yeah.
gonna spend what feels like too long in phase 2. And you may get in there, you might get desensitization, and then you gotta go back to phase 2, because treating religious trauma is a dance. Like, it is an ebb and flow of not back and forth, because there is no back. But there's this new awareness and shifting tides that are happening. And so emotions are gonna fluctuate. It's going to be a back and forth, and you got to have a lot of patience and a lot of compassion and be
It's
very
the clinician,
curious.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. You're saying
No,
something.
go ahead. I'll keep going. Go.
The clinician, right? I think for myself as a new clinician, I'm like, okay, I have to do phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. You just giving grace to the clinicians, right? Of like, I think that's why we have advanced trainings. So like, we don't just complete it and it's done. We have a flow model back and forth, and for the clinician providing the therapy, there's nothing wrong with us if we need to create that flow, is really what you're saying.
Yes, absolutely. And attunement
Mhm.
with your client of what they need. Because again, that internalized, sorry, my dog's barking. That internalized core belief sometimes can be my needs don't matter, or I can't speak up about my needs.
Mhm.
And so to say what they need, and a lot of them have mastered the art of masking and minimizing. So, but that being very attuned with your client and what that need is, and being able to not only listen to the words, but to also listen in between the words and the body language, and that use of co-regulation is so important.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I want to also, as a grief therapist, acknowledging the grieving process as well here, right? You said present day experience. We have 3 targets, right? You know, past, present, and future. There can be some grief. Maybe their future doesn't look the same. Maybe where they're at in their life, they should be married with children. Or I have one patient who has, she's a Caucasian female. She has 3 African American children. Is that okay? Biracial children, in the eyes of the church. And she did go and get married at a young age, and it was a traumatic domestic violence experience because that's what she thought she was supposed to do. And so there's all these layers, right? I think what you're saying, Noel, is very important because it's a layered experience. And for a new clinician treating this, I think these conversations and consultation is important with, there's a lot of books. There's a book, oh, I forget the name of it, Induced After Death Communication, not necessarily religious trauma.
Mhm.
But I think there's a lot of resources that you can use to help you get through that, because it can feel as a clinician like very overwhelming, right?
Mhm. And that brings me to my question because you mentioned the word attunement, right, Noel, and just looking at how some of the clients or the clients that, are journeying through something like religious trauma, possibly are struggling with deep trust issues, right, because of the betrayals and things and the control that happens with the religious leaders. What would you say? What does the clinician who is facilitating EMDR therapy for religious trauma, what do what would we have to, or what would one have to do for themselves to be able to provide that attunement and to really be present,
That's juicy right there. That's great.
Yeah, yeah. Because I'm asking, because one of the things that I'm noticing when I'm doing consultations, and it makes me a bit sad, right, is that so many of us, and hopefully this will help to encourage to raise the bar, because I'm totally one of those people that even for us as mental health clinicians, we can no longer ignore the elephant in the room, you know, in the ways that we as mental health clinicians oftentimes can do beautiful work with the clients, but we're not taking care of ourselves. And so what would we have to do, or what would you say, Noel, one would have to do to be able to take care of themselves as they are providing this type of therapy for someone who's dealing with something like religious trauma?
Giving my dog a minute to see what she's gonna do. Sorry about that. Oh goodness. As anything, can I go let her out real quick? Is that okay?
Yeah, I can kind of respond to, yeah. I think I think we have to be clear about our values. I think a lot of times transference and countertransference can have an impact. If you're struggling with someone or providing therapy to someone, it can cause you possibly to question your beliefs or your demeanor. So I think being very solid in values, Noel, is where I was going. You can pick that up if you have some comments there.
Yes. So whereas we have to be very mindful not to push our own beliefs, our own values, our own spiritual practices onto others, even when they ask. I do live in alignment with when I'm asked a question, I do answer it honestly, but appropriately. And but cultural competency, being aware of the religion of the person that's coming in or where they're coming from. Being aware of your own spiritual beliefs, what does that bring up for you? What does that trigger for you when they're sharing something with you about their experience? Because that's helpful and not overstepping, because you should really only approach this when the client is ready to approach this trauma. Other practices, consultations, ongoing trainings, keeping yourself aware and informed of how this shows up, what it looks like. Even if you're just like, I think this might be going on with my client, and go watch some videos, right? But don't go barreling in the next session and being like, hey, I did this training and like, this is what I think is happening with you. It's like, it's going to guide you in being able to support your client to come to their own realizations. That's the goal of it. But cultural competency is huge. Having an awareness of different types of religion. How often do we grow up and we really only know about our own, or we know a little bit about others, or we even know the stigmas about others, right? Or we have a certain prejudice about others, or I won't list them here, but I can remember growing up and hearing all kinds of bizarre things about different religions that I wasn't born into. And then I learned about them and I meet people who, are devout within them. I'm like, that wasn't true at all. This is, where did you learn that? And having to relearn things that we're taught. Because again, we're also indoctrinated into things. And just being very present, having presence with your client, having presence with yourself. And because it is such a challenging area to work in, I'll go there, right? Like it will bring up fraud complex real quick because it's that ebb and flow and it's challenging. But having to, if you have the tools that you need in order to cope with that, because we all get it, it all comes up. It is a hard task. And if it's hard for us, imagine how hard it is for your client to live every single day. But it'll make you question yourself, like, man, like, do I even know what I'm doing? It's a hard job, right? It really is, to hold space for someone who has been harmed in a way that is, as Kathy said, it's part of it, it's your soul, it's your spirit, it's your eternity.
Yeah.
I so appreciate what you just shared. I remember doing a training back in like 2014, 2015. And this is one thing that I love about EMDR, because it's like when you really embrace EMDR, it gets in the fibers of your being, right? And you become aware of yourself as well. And I know for me, I did this training back in 2014, 2015, and it was what a Gestalt psychologist. And he was from Mexico. And I mean, oh my gosh, was his presence, and it was incredible. And he offered us what I call a gift. And one thing he said was, before we ever became quote unquote therapists, clinicians, he said we were healers. And that is how we were known, right? And he said, and he encouraged us, he said, and so beyond your title, you are a healer. That is the essence of who you are and the work you're doing. And then he said, in every human being who comes and sits before you is going to offer you a gift. And it was so contradictory of that, don't be impacted, don't feel, don't think as a clinician, and just be there and and all the things. And he said, because like how you described that ebb and that flow and that question, he said, every human being you serve is going to offer you a gift, and they're going to turn the light on things you need to heal, things where you need to grow. And
Do your own work, right?
yeah, and do your own work. And I think
Yeah.
that that's the other part of EMDR that I love, is that it really does guide us as well to become aware of our own limiting cognitions and to question, do we keep or do we surrender? Do we let go? Do we got to go get help for ourselves so that we can grow and do our best work with those that we're serving? And so I loved your share on that. And it feels good to me to hear to hear another professional, to hear another EMDR therapist with all the letters and the titles and things we have, but to acknowledge, right? Just to acknowledge that for us all, that we all have it. We're all going to move through it in some way, some form or another. So I thank you for that, Noel, seriously. And I hope whoever's listening to this can catch that, that it's okay. Right, we're all on the journey.
Yeah, I truly feel like we have to get away from being a certain way, being prim and proper and being robots, right? Our biggest tool is who we are and showing up as a human being with a heart and showing up with full presence and allowing, because our clients they show up with gifts. Our people in front of us, they show up with gifts for us. We learn from them. We do. We don't show up knowing everything. If we allow them to guide us and we're listening with just full presence and we're being present with authenticity, and we're also aware where we've been indoctrinated, where we've been harmed, and we've done that work, then because we can be aware of like, oh, this brings up something in me. This is a root I need to tend to, and because I think I said this before, is that we can only take someone as far as we have gone. We can't take them. It doesn't mean that we have to go through religious trauma ourselves or to the extent that they experienced, because we're all not going to have the same experiences. But we do have to be willing to recognize how challenging this work is and be able to look at ourselves and to stay aware, so that we can stay in the lane of compassion and understanding and being able to hear in between those words.
Oh, Noel. Oh, I cannot skate by that one. I think that is a beautiful gift you just offered us all. We can only lead them to the depth, or we can only take them, right, to the depth that we have gone. Not that we have to experience the same, but it's the work, right? Oh my God, that is beautiful. It's the work,
I want to talk about here for a second too. When you're a healer, what kind of people are you going to get? You're going to get the clairvoyants, the psychics. You're going to get people that don't fit the mold. And I think treating these patients and helping them validate their gifts, I'm trying to say this correctly. The healers, the light workers, the stone workers, clairvoyants, the mind readers, helping them realize that those gifts are okay. They maybe weren't okay within the framework and that belief system they came from. I've had so many people who've had those spiritual, intuitive gifts, claircognizant, knowing things that happen before they're going to happen, or connecting with the departed, or, those kinds of things. And they just were struggling with that. And once they came to therapy and we realized we could release those barriers between the gifts that they had or validate them, they were able to open up and become healers, even, in my opinion, bigger than I am, in a natural way. So I think I feel grateful to be in a sacred presence to unleash that experience for them so they can create a wider healing path for so many. If I can just release that one block and validate them for their gift, like it's okay to work in this way. This is your path. This is why you came. They just advance, and it's just magical. So grateful to be there.
Self-acceptance, right?
Yeah.
Going into the worthiness of self-acceptance. And sometimes people have to get used to liking themselves and accepting themselves. And and formulating a new alignment with
align. Yeah, I think that's where we go. Like, if this isn't aligning, what is that? There's a message there, right?
It's also interesting too, I wanted to bring up, it just occurred to me, when depending on the experiences within religion and what has been conditioned to believe, some of the most powerful techniques or grounding techniques, in my opinion, such as using mindful movement, using meditation, using yoga, using nature, sometimes is conditioned to people to be evil or bad or to be of the devil, as Tamera was talking about earlier. And so it's also not forcing that on them too, but allowing them to be ready and to decide the things that they're willing to do to be coping skills, to be ways to ground themselves or to reflect or to connect back with their body. As we know, nature, movement, yoga, mindfulness, meditation, the one of the best ways to build that is through meditation, is through immersing yourself in nature. But that is something that could be conditioned in them to be fearful of or to be avoidant of. And so that's just something that occurred to me too, that a lot of times the methods of which we use, especially if you come from a holistic approach, can feel very threatening initially, and allowing them to find other ways and find their own ways and encourage that, because that's stepping into their own identity, making their own choices, even in small ways. They're making their own tiny choices. And those are just stepping stones to something bigger that they're working towards. So that's just something I want to throw in too, that in phase 2, being mindful of how we implement phase 2.
I love that. I think that is incredible. And that resonated so deep within me because I, again, coming from a very deeply rigid religious community, and being groomed, being groomed to be, a pastor and functioning in a role as an evangelist and a prophet and all these things, right? Talking about gifts and so much I can share on just even when Kathy was talking about the incredible human beings that come into, these sessions and they're clairvoyant or what have you. And what I found is we're pretty much talking about the same things. It's just we got different ways we identify them. But I've learned that, I was afraid. Because of where I came, I didn't even realize it until on my own healing journey and then building my private practice and learning how to take care of myself. And I've been struggling for years trying to do yoga. I couldn't do it before because I had so many physical challenges. But I've always wanted to try it and everything. And I didn't realize until one day, like maybe 7 months ago, that I was secretly doing yoga because I was afraid to say it out loud on social media because of the beliefs I inherited about it from the churches I was a part of, that it was demons and that you're going to get stuff in your spirit and all these things. And on my own healing, it took a lot of freaking courage, because I started practicing, and it was so amazing. So when we talk about the impact of religious trauma and how it moves with us and these deeply ingrained beliefs, I've been out and away from just the religious culture of church for years. And it still came up 7 months ago. And Kathy was probably the first person I said out loud, besides my husband, I'm going to school to be a yoga teacher. Right. But I didn't put it out there and wasn't owning it. And it took a lot of courage for me to say, man, I'm so afraid of these people who follow me and their views and their opinions. But I love this, and this is helping me to heal my mind, my body. And as you said, just that meditation of getting ingrained and getting realigned. you
And
know.
that's where we figure out where our work is, right? Like, I'm
Mhm.
fearful to say this out loud. Oh, there's my work.
Mhm.
There's the work that I need to do.
Mhm.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
as you said that, it was, you know, much like any trauma thrives in secrecy and people not talking. And what are we taught? We don't talk about money. We don't talk about religion. We don't talk about politics around the dinner table, right? These are things that a lot of us are taught to avoid discussion. And when we want to talk about the dark side of religion or politics or things of that area, then I don't want to hear about it.
Mm-mm.
I don't, let's not talk about that. Let's not do that. And that's very invalidating to people who have experienced these traumas within their own religious community. And so like we need to talk about it. We need, because that's the only way that trauma doesn't thrive. Sexual abuse, religious trauma, family violence, right?
Mhm.
Physical abuse, domestic violence, all of that thrives in secrecy because we don't talk about it. And what happens a lot, like, "Oh, there's no way that happened. There's no way that Pastor John, no offense to Pastor John anywhere, there's no way that he did this," right? It's that oftentimes the victim blaming and reinforcement of the shame and the blame that's carried with trauma. But we have to talk about it. We have to we have to have a space of safety and invitation to be able to talk about it. And a lot of times it starts in that therapy room of creating a space, a container to be able to start talking about it before they can talk about it publicly.
Ooh, Noel, I just love it. I love, and I shared this with Kathy. I believe COVID did lots of things and disrupted a lot of things in our world and changed and brought a lot of things to the forefront for us. And that COVID also gave us a gift. I know there was a lot
Yeah.
of love, a lot of all the things, but one of the things I think it
I love
did
this where you're going. I
was
heard it. Go,
that
girl.
it opened the door for us as mental health therapists. That, in other words, I fully believe that right now, we as mental health therapists, that the world has recognized it needs us. It needs us very differently than it needs prescribing professionals, which is, wonderful, but it needs the mental health therapists. It needs the therapists, and we are the healers of the world. And now we have an open gate. We got more than open doors and open windows. We have the world is our oyster right now, and we get to say yes. And we get to yes and take front and center and use our practices, use the platforms that are wide open, available for us to say yes and to step on and begin to create these spaces so that we can help humanity heal. Not that I'm trying to burden us or anything like that, but I truly do believe that we are here to lift the suffering of the world, that is what our occupation is. And that when we have more therapists who are tuned, who are aligned and saying yes to that, boy, are we going to see major shifts. So
What I want to say in response to that really quick, I know we're almost at our time, is I love that. I align with that. I'm on that vision. And there's an alternate world, which I just discovered, that still is entrenched in stigma, still is entrenched in the culture of secrecy. And so don't stop, because those people that aren't aligned, don't understand, or maybe they're in a different mindset of things they value, don't stop, because it's all about levels of consciousness, right? We have a different level of consciousness. If I can give them compassion of like, those aren't my people, but that doesn't mean that I can't continue to expand this and maybe at some point circle back around to them, in their own ways. Some people just aren't ready to hear what we have to do on our mission, and that's okay. But just continuing to stop and sow those seeds is just so critical, right?
It's all about planting seeds. Yeah. It's all about planting seeds sometimes. And certainly, like, we're showing up, and I don't mean any irony or pun intended with this, but when we divinely trust our client's ability to awaken their own inner healer, and we divinely trust their own process, then we can do the work even more efficiently for them by showing up and just knowing, trusting that it's within them. We're just holding a flashlight, right? Like we just have a framework, and we're able to have the bird's eye view of where the dance is and where the work is, and allow them to unfold that. And that's far better than when we show up with our codependent tendencies of like, let me tell you what the problem is. I already know what the problem is. Let me fix it for you, right? And we show up and we're able to be present with them in order for them to find their own power. That's lasting change.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Well, ladies, Noel, thank you so much for joining us today and be a part of Journey Through the Eyes. And again, we want to just encourage and remind our listening audience that we are truly here to inform, inspire, ignite the passion for EMDR therapy. And I'm going to go on and give it over to our amazing host. And Kathy, don't forget to have them to subscribe to our podcast and just be a part of this beautiful community that's dedicated to facilitating healing and transformation, like our beautiful sister friend Noel just talked about.
I receive it. I want to remind everyone on our listening audience, you can email us journeypodcast360@gmail.com. Reach us on our websites, Arise Psychotherapy and Counseling, rewired360.com, where we rewire how therapists learn, lead, and thrive in conversations like this. We invite you, if you would like to be a guest on our podcast, you can reach out to us and we can discuss that with you, because we always are curious about new topics and things. So just reaching out to Noel, extending light and gratitude to your heart, to your work, your essence, who you are. You are just an amazing little soul. So grateful from Texas to Louisiana to Idaho, the Triad. We can continue to spread our light. So you're amazing, both of you. I'm honored to be here today with you, and we'll see you next time.
We will see you next time. You're
Thoroughly
welcome.
enjoyed it. Thank you.
Bye.
Namaste.
Bye, guys.